All right, check out Alex Jones.
Nobody can stop them. They're having their way with America. They want our guns. And if you're not with them, cops and military, then you will declare that you're with the Republic now. And don't tell me that I'm a weirdo because I'm upset about this, and I should only go get upset about my favorite football team winning or losing. Listen, I know what tyranny means. I know the bankers are putting poison in our food and water. I know the bankers have stolen $8.5 trillion. I know we're under War Powers Act. I know they're hurting us. I know they're carrying out New World Order. I know they've staged those terror attacks. You know what it's like to go up to this and go out every day and go past the peer pressure and come out day one and say 9/11 was an inside job and lose most of the radio stations I was on? You know what it's like to go to sleep every night knowing you work for a bunch of psychotic killers and you bastards are probably going to end up killing me one day? You know what it's like knowing you've ruined my life? You know what it's like? You sons of bitches! I'm tired of your crap! You commit evil, you're part of an evil system, and we're standing up against you! And the Republic is going to defeat you in the end! Some of us won't make it personally through this, but a lot of us are. And in the end, you are going to be brought to justice. You're not invincible, and God's going to deal with you. And you are cursed to hell.
Destiny, always a rising sun. Oh, I was born, six gun in my hand, behind a gun, I'll make my final stand.
Okay, well, that was Bad Company, which there seems to be a lot of taking place around the world. Okay, so the next guest moving along, Patrick Woodall from Food and Water Watch is going to be talking about the TPP. New York Times reports Congressional Republican leaders and White House officials. I mean, again, this is, the TPP. I mean, it's been passed. We're all, or most people are aware of that. I don't know if people are aware that it's not all about trade. There are other things snuck in there which can be found. WikiLeaks has exposed a lot of the hidden characteristics of the TPP. So let me get Patrick Woodall. He is not on Skype, so that's why I have to call him in.
Hello.
Hi, Patrick.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Thank you so much for joining us on Organic News on Awake Radio. Right, you're from Food and Water Watch.
I am.
And right, I mean, they have since passed, the TPP.
They passed fast track.
Fast track.
They passed fast track. TPP is a little further down the road, but fast track was a legislation that allows the president to present future trade deals, including the TPP, to Congress for an up or down, take it or leave it vote. And that was passed a couple of weeks ago and has been subsequently signed into law.
So, I just wanted to ask, so, I mean, when they say pass, they passed it. I always have to sort of question the language used because, it seems kind of obvious it's not being passed legitimately. Like they're kind of, slipping it in or sliding it and hiding it. And is that fair?
It did take a certain amount of legislative shenanigans to get the Congress to approve it. In the House, it took a couple of tries and involved a certain amount of legislative encouragement or coercion amongst Republican leadership. There's rumors that there were some promised transportation funding for some Democrats, and so it took some efforts to get it done. But it ultimately did pass by an extraordinarily narrow margin. I mean, in the Senate, it passed by a single vote, which is the narrowest passage of this kind of trade bill in memory, maybe back to the Reagan administration, at least, probably longer. In the House, it passed by a tiny handful of votes, and it took several tries to figure out how they were going to get it done. So it was very difficult for them to do it, and this does suggest that the coming debate over the underlying trade bill itself, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, will continue to be a difficult one for the forces of corporate America, the Wall Street, K Street alliance that is pushed by the Republican leadership in the White House.
Last week, I think, actually 2 weeks ago, I had Margaret Flowers and Kevin Zeese on, speaking about this too. It was actually the day of the vote, and they were down, they took a bus, they were trying to get a whole bunch of people to go down there. There's all of these, like posts and event pages on social media calling, for people to call, their Congress people, to be against, the TPP. They're presenting it like it's a trade agreement, but it's not just a trade agreement. There's more to it.
Right. So, I mean, look, the historically going back to the kind of period, the post-war period, these trade deals were largely a matter of tariffs and quotas. They were about the tax that we put on imports and the volume of imports that we could bring into the country. And they're really about commerce, right? exports and imports and things like that. But starting in the mid-90s, early 90s, trade agreements transformed into a kind of far-reaching deregulatory body that was able to reach into other countries and make decisions about their laws. And basically, these kinds of, they cover a huge range of issues now. It's not just about goods crossing borders, but it's about intellectual property. It's about investment rules. It's about domestic sovereignty. It's about food safety. It's about animal welfare. It's about a host of other things that really amount to a kind of backdoor for transnational corporations to challenge U.S. and other countries' laws and rules that are designed to protect the public interest. So the kind of common sense environmental, worker, and consumer protections that Americans take for granted are now viewed as a potential non-tariff trade barrier, which is a kind of trade speak for a regulation they don't like. And they use the mechanisms inside the trade agreements to attack those kind of very straightforward and ordinary rules and regulations as trade barriers in an effort to kind of go around the Congress, to go around the president, and to go around the American people. And this happens not infrequently. This is reasonably common. Right now, the U.S. country of origin labels for meat, for beef and for pork, that say where your meat comes from, whether it was born and raised in America or not, that has been challenged as an illegal trade barrier, right? So a simple label that says this hamburger, this steak comes from America was challenged as a trade barrier. The Canada and Mexico challenged it, and there's been a long-standing World Trade Organization dispute, and they have prevailed in Geneva at the World Trade Organization. And the Congress, in response, is acting right now to repeal these labels. Consumers love these labels, and more than 95% of Americans support knowing where their food is from.
Right.
And not just that, they support the specific label that is on people's pork and beef, but it was challenged at the WTO, and now Congress, in a panic, is trying to repeal a statute that is supported not only by consumers, but by the overwhelming majority of farmers.
Isn't it not only where the animal was born and raised, but also the quality of how they're treated? Isn't that also being compromised?
Well, I mean, I think in this case, the label that is being challenged is on origin, the country of origin labeling. But obviously, this line of logic would apply to a host of other things, including some sustainability labels and some free-range labels if they're applied as a part of a statute or a measure. So things like California's cage-free eggs would be one of them. So, those things are all susceptible to challenge. Canada challenged Europe's ban on seal fur at the World Trade Organization, and ultimately the World Trade Organization decided that Europe's animal welfare rules that prohibited the importation of seal fur, right, the kind of seal clubbing that is being used to export for the fur coat market, they ruled that the measure was not WTO legal because it was a broad ban on these products, and instead urged Europe to make a more narrow, tailored approach to the problem, and a problem which is rampant animal welfare considerations on trapping of fur seal. So, this is something that is wide-range approach that can really undermine the kind of things that we do domestically that take a really long time. These are not things that happen in a fit of peace. It took, more than a decade to get country of origin labels onto our foods, and efforts. These are broad social movements where people make an effort to change the way our food is labeled or the way that it's produced and things like that. And then you work through the Congress and through the regulatory bodies, all of which is much, much harder than it should be and is very, very arduous. And even when you do that, unelected trade bureaucrats in Geneva get to decide whether what the Congress did at the will of the American people is something that is legal or not under international trade rules. And that is just absurd. And that's the kind of overreach that is occurring in these international trade pacts that really threatens the kind of basic ability of Americans to make decisions through their elected government about the way they want to live their lives.
Right. I mean, it's like the will of the people means nothing. It just seems time and time again, it's everything is at the expense of the people. For the corporations, for the bankers.
Right, and that's the kind of yardstick that the trade agreements use. They basically say, look, you're allowed to do things, but you can't do things that will affect global commerce. And so and these are for things that are very common sense, for public health protections, for food safety protections. The rubric that is used is it the least trade restrictive, or that is, does it affect trade as little as possible? Sure, you can protect food safety, but you have to do it in a way that has virtually no impact on global trade. And that's very difficult given that we import a colossal amount of food. And for some things, it is the majority of food that we eat. For many kinds of fruits, vegetables, and obviously the overwhelming majority of seafood that we eat is imported. So when you have a food safety rule that is designed to protect the American public, and the trade regime says no, the food safety rule has to put first and foremost the interest of the importers and exporters, and the public and the public health comes second, that is really problematic. And it ultimately can put consumers at risk and erodes our ability as Americans to kind of have elected governments that's responsive to our needs and wants.
I mean, what you're saying, I just in the first hour was Kostas Panagiotakis talking about Greece, and he's got a book, Remaking Scarcity from Capitalistic Inefficiency to Economic Democracy. I mean, and so what you're saying, it just like sounds so similar. I mean, you have to, take reality into consideration. I mean, like with the situation with Greece and the banks. I mean, they're not looking to help Greece. They want Greece to be in debt. And so this just like sounds so similar. Corporations and banks, they just don't want to acknowledge the fact that we live, in an environment that has like finite resources, that other people actually live on this earth too besides them. And I mean, it just, right, it can't just be business as usual forever.
One would hope, obviously. It does seem that at the moment that the business interests are really prevailing on a lot of these fronts. And obviously the situation in Greece is related to the kind of global trade pact. It is both part and parcel of this IMF debt load is part of the same set of bodies that were created that led to the World Trade Organization, and obviously the EU was created in a different kind of global agreement or multi-party agreement, which established the EU and ultimately the euro. So it is a related set of problems that put these kind of commercial interests and financial interests ahead of the public interest many, many times. And that's the goal, right? I mean,
Right.
the purpose of these trade agreements is to kind of provide another forum for businesses to get their way when they do poorly with the public. And so it's a way to, use the power of investments to coerce local communities to have mines that they don't want and quarries that they don't want. Some of these provisions on investment are being used to kind of prevent countries from establishing plain label packaging for tobacco products and other public health measures. They're being used to attack a host of things that are most people would think of as very ordinary and common sense things.
Right.
Measures designed to prevent more kids from smoking are viewed as attacking investments in some way. And that actually is really the kind of the real travesty here, where we could set up an international trade system that really is being used to erode the quality of life for people in America and all over the world.
So I'm glad you mentioned, common sense, things. I mean, I don't know how things have gotten as bad as they've gotten like to this point. I mean, because profit has basically taken over at the expense of people on so many levels. I've interviewed people on the justice system, the for-profit prisons, the police, the Correctional Corporation of America, the companies that actually profit off of people in debt. Chris Hedges wrote an article about it, and so it's more and more getting just sort of common. Instead of common sense, it's common to, use the public as just another commodity that companies and banks profit off of.
Yeah, and a lot of these things, like the kind of the privatization of a huge number of public services or things that should be public goods, are also part of these trade deals as well. We're concerned about that. I mean, there are other trade deals coming down the pike, one with Europe and one that will address the kind of global services, which can have an effect on things. And for Food and Water Watch, the thing that we've been working on that is most effective is municipal water systems, right? Where when you have a public water system, the upkeep is better, the prices are better, and there is more universal access to tap water. But obviously, when some of the biggest companies take over municipal water systems, a couple of things happen. They don't invest in repairs. The system has more breakdowns than with a public system. They pay their workers less. They reinvest in the system less. And they often charge people more money, and they cut people off. So you have a situation where you transform what was a public good into a private good, and those companies essentially suck value out of the system at great expense in quality of service, comprehensiveness of service, and the price of service for the consumers. And this can happen on the water system, but obviously there are tons of things that historically have been public, like prisons, that have become increasingly privatized, and these future trade agreements, we suspect, will address some of the privatization issues as well, which we're particularly concerned about.
And I was going to ask you if to talk a little bit about the drought in California and how, if that is in any way related to the TPP.
Well, I mean, I think there are ways to think about it that are. Obviously, a certain portion of California's agricultural production is dedicated towards exports instead of towards the domestic market. This is true of many agricultural products, and obviously selling things abroad is a value, but when you are producing more exclusively for export, especially when they are water-intensive crops, what you're effectively doing is exporting water out of arid systems into who knows where, but ultimately that's essentially sending California's water overseas, which has an impact. And, in part this is on the choices of the crops that people produce. So if you are producing something like almonds, which are, purportedly it takes a gallon of water to produce a single almond, and you're exporting a tremendous number of those. The question is whether, obviously almonds are very valuable, so the kind of drop per dollar makes some sense to some people, but ultimately you're putting intense pressure on the water system to get a few dollars of export revenue, and maybe that needs to be thought about more carefully.
What is your feeling on the desalinization idea?
We have been generally opposed to desalinization, but they can be kind of complicated stories, and we have been working on in opposition to several desalinization plants because they are very energy intensive. They generally are extremely expensive. There are better ways to ensure that people have enough water through conservation and better public policy. So we've been skeptical of this as a kind of technological fix that really is no fix at all.
So, how do people, I don't know how the whole country, in the whole world is just not completely rising up against all of this. I mean, how bad do you think it has to get for that to happen?
Well, I think it's pretty bad now, and I think that the reality is there are lots more people paying attention to this than ever before. So when this first started happening in the establishment of the World Trade Organization and the North American Free Trade Agreement, which is sort of the grandfather of the trade agreements like the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and people say that the TPP is NAFTA on steroids because some of the worst elements of NAFTA have been expanded, and look, there's going to be a thousand plus pages of text, and that can hide a lot of kind of corporate giveaways inside the text of the trade agreement. So I think there are more people paying attention to it now than ever before, and they recognize that it has huge implications for day-to-day life. Right, so obviously for a long time people have been very aware that what this was doing was offshoring millions and millions of high-paying, good-paying manufacturing jobs with benefits that supported working families across the country, and that we've lost millions of those jobs, and that's affected millions and millions of people in these households that relied on them to get mortgages and send their kids to college and live a decent standard of living, and that's been a huge impact of these trade deals. And it's contributed immensely to the economic inequality in America, the kind of growing gulf between a tiny number of haves and a larger pool of have-nots who have even less than they had before. So the trade deals are a big part of that kind of growing economic inequality, income and wealth between working Americans and the super rich investor class. But obviously people are learning more and more about the impact that these trade deals have on other things, the kind of effect they have on environmental rules, the effect they have on food safety and constant labeling rules. More people know about it than ever. I think that what we learned in this most recent congressional battle is that the American people are watching and that they are more engaged than ever before. And I believe that this kind of attention to this is going to make it possible to block the Trans-Pacific Partnership when Congress takes it up later in the year.
So the TPP also, it affects things like medications and the internet.
Absolutely. So there are some 30 chapters, 29 chapters, 31 chapters. No one is exactly sure. That's one of the other amazing things. The negotiation has been going on for 6 or 7 years, but it's been totally secret. So the U.S. government negotiators have been working with the 11 other countries in the TPP. The Trans-Pacific Partnership is a 12-nation deal that runs around the Pacific Rim and includes the U.S. and Canada and Japan, Mexico and Chile and Peru and New Zealand, Australia, Malaysia, Vietnam, and Singapore. So it's a wide-ranging deal and includes all kinds of countries of differing levels of economic sophistication. The agreement itself, we believe, has 30-ish chapters, and it's been negotiated in secret. There are some 600 special advisors, almost all of whom are corporations or their lobbyists or their trade associations. And so this has been hidden even from the Congress. And it hasn't been until this April, when Congress really had a crack at looking at the text. And even still, they are prohibited from taking their cell phones with them or taking notes on the text. And remember, this is going to be thicker than a phone book, and the members of Congress are going to have to go in and kind of flip through it and try and remember how this is going to affect things. It's very complicated. But there's a chapter on intellectual property, trademarks and patents, which is pretty much a giveaway to the pharmaceutical and the technology industries and other sectors that rely on patents and trademarks, because it effectively will kind of extend the life of pharmaceutical patents. It'll make it harder for generic drugs to get on the market. It'll make it more difficult to access generic pharmaceuticals in the developing world for essential medicines against malaria and TB and HIV, and is really going to have a severe effect on global public health. And in the U.S., what it's going to ultimately mean is that since it'll take longer for generic drugs to get on the market, it's going to mean that they're more expensive. And for people that are in need of accessing drugs and life-saving drugs, it maybe put some of these medicines out of their financial reach. And the same is true on the internet. So, people here in America have been fighting tooth and nail for net neutrality to ensure that people could get access to information on the internet and services on the internet, irrespective of the manner in which they were paying, basically, so that everybody had an equal crack, and that the people that were paying the very most didn't get first in line on access to the internet. And that has been a fight that a lot of internet freedom folks have been having. A huge amount of citizens have been engaged on this, and there's been a huge pressure to get this done. And ultimately, it appears the Obama administration has started to take steps to ensure that net neutrality would actually go into place. But there are rules in the kind of intellectual property provisions of the TPP that we believe will essentially make that impossible and allow the internet service providers to be essentially a toll booth for the internet for all consumers, and put consumers that are lower income or rural or with worse internet access at great disadvantage to those that are able to pay considerably more, and allow the internet service providers to essentially pick winners and losers.
I mean, what you're describing sounds like just a war against the people. I mean, that's what I hear. And where is the government in all of this? I mean, right, they get to negotiate all this stuff in secret. I mean, how is this allowed? And why is Obama, I mean, he's the one fast tracking it.
There is the rub, I think, for a lot of people, which is, when Obama campaigned in 2008, he vowed that he would put an end to these kind of trade deals, that the trade deals that offshore jobs, the trade deals that allowed trade tribunals to trump U.S. laws and standards and safeguards, and he promised that he would not support deals like NAFTA ever again. And subsequently, and in recent years, he's kind of had a change of heart, and now he supports a Trans-Pacific Partnership that is, as I said, really NAFTA on steroids. He's launched an aggressive public relations campaign where he has suggested that this is the best trade deal in history, which is an easy thing to say when you don't let people look at the text. And he has attacked the critics mercilessly, including progressive stalwarts like Senator Elizabeth Warren and Senator Sherrod Brown, long-standing critics of these trade deals. The portions that the public has seen have been through WikiLeaks,
Yeah.
and those provisions have been as bad or worse than any trade deal ever proposed. That in many cases, particularly on things like protections for labor and the environment, to ensure that countries live up to their own labor laws, that make an effort to really move to the kind of protections guaranteed by the International Labor Organization. Those provisions are actually, we believe, worse than the Peru free trade agreement that was negotiated by the Bush administration under what was known as the April 10th agreement, which ensured that countries would uphold their domestic laws and that we could bring trade challenges to countries that did not uphold their own labor and environmental laws, and ensure that workers would have the ability to bargain collectively for independent union representation. Now, we do not believe that the TPP contains anything near as strong as that, and moreover, the Obama administration, which is really in charge of enforcing our current trade laws as well, has done little or nothing to ensure that the trade agreements that have these provisions are really being used to raise worker and environmental standards in our partner countries.
Right. You know, again, it's like the corporations just want to turn the whole world into a prison. And, like it is pretty bad now, like you said. And so, where is the, I mean, because if it goes, like the longer people wait, like that's always what worries me. Like if it gets too bad and, and people wait too long, the scale is going to be tipped too much, and then it's just going to be that much harder. I mean, you got to do it, when it's a little bit easier.
Yes, I agree that it is, there is no time for people to wait to engage in this process. I mean, now is really the time for people to step up and express their concerns to their member of Congress and to tell particularly their House of Representatives their member of the House of Representatives, that they are opposed to the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And by derailing the TPP, we can really start to have a national discussion about the kind of trade policy that works for workers, that works for the environment, that works for consumers, that works to ensure that the trade agreements don't bring our standards down to the lowest common denominator, but ensure that working families here have a chance, and that our standards can lift up other countries, which is not the way it works now.
And so, what should the people do? Just rise up, refuse, like they're doing in Greece. I mean, just kind of an example. Stop paying their taxes.
I would not recommend that your listeners stop paying their taxes. I think this is a difficult question, but the most simple answer is that people need to get engaged, and so
Right.
they need to join with their neighbors and groups around the country that are really coordinating efforts to ensure that we can hold our elected representatives accountable. These votes are going to occur much closer to the next election than most members of Congress are comfortable with. Their preference would be to hold this vote as far away from the election as possible so that the voters had only the faintest recollection of when the trade deal was voted on. But this will likely come right before the very beginning of the 2016 primaries. So now is the time to get engaged and to contact your member of Congress and to contact groups on the ground that are really working on this all over the country.
And so, from the on your Food and Water Watch site, people can, find, get more information, right? Like, what is the Trans-Pacific Partnership? What is Fast Track? Fast Track, I'll just read President Obama has asked Congress for Trade Promotion Authority, a legislative mechanism that would force Congress to quickly approve or fast-track the Trans-Pacific Partnership and other future trade deals. Fast-track authority would only give Congress an like you said, up or down vote on these critical trade deals, essentially eliminating congressional oversight of the devilish details included in the trade agreement. I mean, like, this just makes no sense. I mean, it's literally, the people were already sold out when we had the crash. The banks got bailed out, the people got sold out, and it's just the people are getting sold out over and over and over.
It is not always, it can be disheartening. I will, but let me just say that these votes are incredibly close and incredibly tough, and what's the measure of difference is the public engagement on this really arcane issue, right? So they want to make it opaque. They want to make it hard to understand. They want to make it difficult so that the kind of graybeards in Washington can pat the people on their heads and say, there, you just don't understand this trade stuff. It's very complicated, too complicated for you. Everything will be fine. The president promises this will be the most progressive trade deal in history. But that's balderdash. And more people know that that's just complete nonsense. And by being engaged and really communicating and working together and organizing to fight these trade deals, we are building power across the country to hold Congress accountable. And this is a huge fight. And it's, unlike lots of fights, let me just say, look, when you are bailing out the Wall Street banks to benefit Wall Street and not Main Street, you're only standing up to Wall Street. And when you're fighting to get good healthcare reform, you're fighting against the medical industrial complex, right? The pharmaceutical companies, the hospital companies, the entrenched in doctor interests, right? So you're fighting against that portion of the economy. When you're fighting these trade deals, you're fighting all of global corporate interests. It is everybody. It's a huge, enormous, mammoth corporate trade lobby that is pushing that. And even though it's an alliance between Wall Street and big pharma and the tech companies and the biggest manufacturing companies and the K Street lobbyists and Wall Street and the Republican leadership and the White House, they're just barely squeaking by. They're just barely winning these votes. So public engagement makes a huge difference. They really barely passed this past week, or 2 weeks ago. So your effort, the public's effort, makes a tremendous difference. And right now, I think people are gearing up to take down the TPP and to prevent Congress from selling out the people and voting for a trade deal that is going to have dramatic repercussions for the American public, and instead standing with the people and voting against the TPP.
Right. I mean, so, Obama went against his word with many things. You said this trade agreement also, closing Guantanamo, ending the wars. I mean, at what point, again, do the people even have the right to, impeach a president? Take him out of office. I mean, I just, I don't know, I get sort of tired of, the people, it's like they have no recourse, and I don't, I refuse to accept that.
Well, I think that I agree that we should not accept that we have no recourse. I mean, ultimately, what these kind of fights show us is that it requires the people to work together to demonstrate the organized power to force the Congress to do what we want. And it's going to be working together, alliances between workers and environmentalists and social activists and faith communities and farmers, public health advocates working together and demonstrating a unified force, that is going to be what ends up beating this. But it's indisputably a difficult fight. But I think that what we've learned in the past year is that we, working together, are much more powerful than people would have expected. They thought this would be easy. They thought they would pass this before March. And by concerted effort to defeat fast track, we really worked and made it very hard for them to prevail. And it demonstrates that we can win. It's possible to win. And we're just going to fight tooth and nail to prevent them from passing CPP.
Right. I mean, it just does come down to the math and the resistance, and the more people resist and stand up, the better chance, the people have. I mean, it is in their best interest to stand up and resist.
And I think that's true. And really, remember, particularly in the House of Representatives, these members of Congress are very responsive to the public when they call in and email their members of Congress, reaching out, personal connections with your member of Congress, setting up meetings with them when they're home on congressional recess. In August, the Congress is going to be home for most of a month, and many members have town hall meetings and going to them and thanking those that voted against fast track and shaming those that voted for fast track is a great way to really engage with the Congress and to show them that their votes matter and that voting against the people has consequences.
Right. Heaven forbid the powers that be have consequences. And I just wanted to mention there's a link on the Food and Water Watch website that links to the Public Citizen, an article, June 10th, 2015, new Public Citizen report documents systematic bipartisan betrayals on deals made by presidents, congressional leaders in exchange for the trade votes. And if you go down, it lists some members of Congress, the decision to cast controversial trade votes in exchange for empty promises of political cover has exposed them to such constituent IRE, anger, as to lead the electoral defeat. And it lists a Representative Robin Hayes, Matthew Martinez, Democrat from California. That's kind of it. Those two. I wish
there are actually a couple more going back further. I think the report lists, 6 or 10 over the years. But these are members that lost their seats pretty much solely on this vote, on these kind of trade votes. And so, they have consequences. Ultimately, this is very controversial. And it's not just controversial for progressives, although it's extremely controversial for progressives. But even amongst Republicans, there is resistance to this, and they view basically these international trade tribunals the same way that progressives do. They view them as an inappropriate reach into U.S. sovereignty and an attack on American laws and the right of the people to govern themselves. So there is broad-based opposition to these trade deals. The only place where there's agreement is in the boardroom. There's no agreement amongst the people. The polls are unanimously against these trade deals across the political spectrum. So what needs to happen is for the people across the country to reach out to their member of Congress and let them know that they don't want them to support the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Look, fast track in some respects was a kind of it's a procedural vote. So it's a vote on a way to consider votes in the future, right? So it's not on a trade deal itself. So it's almost a meta trade vote, and it is one that is very arcane. But the next vote is going to be on the deal itself, and by the time they cast that vote, we're going to know what's the devil that is in the details, and we'll be able to hold members accountable. They aren't going to be able to hide and say, oh, but the president promises this will be great, or say, oh, I've been told this will help the business interests in my district. They won't be able to say that because the people will know it's in the documents.
Thank you, Patrick Woodall from Food and Water Watch. Is that the best place for people to go, is to the Food and Water Watch website?
Yes, it's a great place to go, and people can sign up for our action alerts, which have been, and we've been extensively writing on the process on Fast Track and on the CPP, so people can stay up to date there.
Thank you very, very much, Patrick Woodall.
Thank you.
Have a great night.
You too.
Bye. Okay, I wanted to read, this is an email from Les Jamison. He was asking me if I could read it on the show. If I have a few minutes to fill on my show, it would be great if I could read the following. It's about, the missing 28 pages of the 9/11 report. Remember the missing 18 minutes of the Watergate tapes? They're nothing compared to the missing 28 pages of the Congressional Joint Inquiry Report on 9/11 that have been kept secret since President Bush classified them in 2002. This was a clear abuse of power, according to several officials who produced the report, classifying this entire chapter that focused on funding of 9/11 had nothing to do with national security interests. It was to protect Bush family relationships with Saudi royals, protect certain Middle East countries and certain U.S. agencies. Since 2003, there have been efforts to pressure President Bush and then President Obama to release the 28 pages to ensure transparency at the highest level, to inform the 9/11 families and public, and to reveal ongoing funding of extremist groups throughout the Middle East. Even co-chairs of the 9/11 Commission, Tom Keene and Lee Hamilton, favor their release. Now there is legislation in both the House and the Senate to finally obtain the declassification of this 9/11 evidence. Presidential candidate Rand Paul is one of the sponsors of the Senate bill. Finally, after 14 years, 9/11 activism has reached the political level. Learn more by going to www.hr14.org. That's hr14.org. Please be sure to click on the Roots Action Petition tab and add your name to this unique petition. Join the Facebook group. You can be part of a growing movement to show Congress there's a large constituency calling for transparency and accountability for 9/11. So we have just about 10 minutes left, and I wanted to play just a bit of last night. They had another No Separate Justice vigil outside the MCC, the Metropolitan Correctional Center at 150 Park Row in Lower Manhattan. Every month, the first Monday of the month, No Separate Justice, a group of people show up to, just to inform people of that right in this facility. It's not just in Guantanamo, it's actually right in MCC. People being detained indefinitely and held without trial or due process, for alleged, whatever, things the powers that be, say. So pardon me while I just need to find,
the targeting of disinfectant.
okay, I'm going to play, this is Shahana Hanif, who's going to talk about the two young women from Queens that were arrested for, quote, unquote, bomb making. and she is going to talk.
To other people.
Okay,
And it,
sorry, I hope the,
Political action communities.
okay, sorry.
Shahana Hanif, she works with CAB and she's a housing justice advocate. So
I hope the audio is okay.
My name is Shahana Hanif. I currently work as a public housing organizer at CAB Organizing Asian Communities, and I'm a proud alumna of Brooklyn College. I credit Brooklyn College for helping me find my voice, and I credit my peers and mentors for guiding my interests in Islam and feminism, political action, and social justice. It was at Brooklyn College that I would dissect verses of the Quran for my senior thesis, got involved in domestic violence advocacy with Saki for South Asian Women, and organized extracurricular events to unify South Asian students on campus, all of which were transformational experiences in my life. Yet it was also at Brooklyn College where I implicitly and explicitly learned that my thoughts were dangerous, a cause for suspicion, and reason to be watched and surveilled. I know that Brooklyn College alumni Fahad Hashmi had been one of the many victims of warrantless surveillance, had been kept in solitary confinement pre-trial, and had been subjected to what can be described as egregious human rights violations happening on American soil right in front of our eyes. I saw so many of my friends organize around this trial and realized time and time again what they were up against. I was also around when in August 2011, the Associated Press blew the lid off of the NYPD's surveillance program. I saw the chilling impact of the revelations, how all of us started questioning our friendships and what we said and who we said it around. Little did we know that as those revelations came to light, there was an undercover police officer amongst us. This undercover police officer had already infiltrated circles at Brooklyn College. She presented herself as a new convert and started targeting young women who were really committed to the religious practice. She appeared interested in learning more about Islam, but then exhibited behavior that raised red flags for many of those around her. She always seemed to be around, even when she wasn't invited, and started asking questions about jihad and other controversial topics. As those she was around at Brooklyn College started distancing themselves from her, the undercover branched out. She started running in Queens college circles. 3 years after she first appeared, she met Queens residents Asia and Noel, both of whom held strong political views about the
I just wanted to pause it and read the names. Noel Valenzas, 28 years old, and Asia Siddiqui, 31 years old, were arrested on April the 2nd, 2015.
American invasion of the Middle East and the expansion of the Muslim state. It was these political beliefs that likely made them targets. They also came from very poor backgrounds. One was homeless for a while and the other had documented mental health issues. These arrests serve as a reminder that surveillance is still happening and is hitting closer to home than ever before. This domestic sphere of the war on terror is just one of the much larger criminalization and dehumanization of black and brown bodies, both here and abroad. The continued expansion of the police state, right after these arrests, it was announced that the NYPD was getting additional counterterrorism funding for expanded surveillance. The targeting of disenfranchised and often mentally unstable young people, and the criminalization of an entire faith group should alarm us all. More so, the ability of the NYPD to continually make its way onto our campuses without any pushback from college administrations is outrageous. We are here today to draw attention to Asia and Noel's case and to call on all concerned citizens to demand that the NYPD end its warrantless surveillance of Muslim Americans. Thank you all for being here today.
next we're going to have Victor Payne speak from the campaign for alternatives to isolated confinement, otherwise known as CAPE. He's going to be speaking about the activities that CAPE has been doing around the issues of solitary confinement, and also talk a little bit about the case of Khalif Browder.
Bishop, to being a survivor of solitary confinement myself, during my period of incarceration, which cumulatively served 15 years, and throughout the 15 years, I was also placed in solitary confinement numerous times, too many times to mention, over a period of time of my incarceration. And I can definitely say that that is one of the worst form of torture that can be placed upon someone who is already incarcerated, and to be further incarcerated, or to be further dehumanized. To speak to some of the things that happen to people while in solitary confinement, some of you may be aware, may not be aware of the case of Khalif Browder, who was a young man who was arrested and placed in solitary confinement for 2 of 3 years while he was in confinement. Mind you, take into account that he was never brought to trial for the alleged charges that he was being charged with. And he was only being held in pre-trial detention status. And he never, ever got convicted. As a matter of fact, the case was thrown out. But during his period of solitary confinement, he went through a lot of different changes psychologically, physically, and once he was released, he was never the same again. And I can tell you from first-hand experience that being in solitary confinement really does something to you. It actually develops mental health issues. If you did not go in there with one, believe me, when you come out, you will have one. I had one, and I'm quite sure those that are in and continue to be in solitary confinement continue to be afflicted by the mental health issue. Being in a cell by yourself 23 to 24 hours a day with no human contact whatsoever, with no meaningful program, with nothing to stimulate the mind, is just almost too horrific to fathom. So just imagine people being held in solitary confinement for years, and in some cases, decades. And we have, across the country, over 80,000 people that are now being held in solitary confinement in our prisons and in our jails. And in New York State jails, it's at least 5,000 people being held in solitary confinement. Well, the experience of being in solitary confinement and the things that happen to a person definitely decreases a person's opportunity to act humanely once they are released into society if they were being treated inhumanely. This is something that you cannot expect to happen because the mathematics just does not add up. So, getting back to the case of this Robert, who was a young man, like I said, that tried to recover his life once he was released. Unfortunately for him, the collateral damages, the psychological damages, physical damages that had occurred to him while he was in confinement, he was never ever able to fully overcome. And as a result, shortly after his release, he committed suicide and he hung himself as a result of him being unable to cope with being out in society. So this is just some of the things that happens to a person while they are in solitary confinement. And I say that it's inhumane, it's inhumane, and it should not continue to happen. We as a people must do something to change this circumstance. The campaign for alternatives to isolated confinement is a campaign to draw attention to this, to change the situation with solitary confinement as it is.
Okay, that was Victor Pate. Yeah, sorry, I apologize for the audio. It was outdoors. The traffic wasn't actually that bad, but there was buses going by every once in a while. So Victor Pate, CAIC, C-A-I-C, Campaign for Alternatives to Isolated Confinement, CAIC, talking about Khalif Browder held in Rikers Island for 2 to 3 years, 2 years in solitary confinement. He was never charged. He was beat by corrections officers, beat by inmates. He was so traumatized by it, he committed suicide. And he never even committed a crime. The system commits a crime against you. So thank you. That would be organic news for this evening. Thank you for tuning in. Again, I ask people to please go to my YouTube channel, April Waters with 2 T's. Please donate even $1. If everyone who viewed this video that I was just playing, it's about a half an hour long. It's really, really informative. Justin Mazzola from Amnesty International also speaks and talking about the torture, the McCain-Feinstein amendment to the NDAA is on this video. So please, April Waters, YouTube, please donate $1 and share the videos. Thank you so much. Keep fighting the good fight. Speak truth to power.